Story 1. My grandfather was in his late 80s or early 90s when he caused a minor fender bender on the way to a medical appointment. A few days later, he underwent brain surgery to repair a bleed caused by the accident. After he recovered, he was required to retake the driving test. His doctor submitted documentation stating he was medically unfit to drive. My father submitted a document saying he lived in town and would make sure my grandfather had transportation as needed. My grandfather was dangerous on the road and in the early stages of dementia. The state of Florida reinstated his license. Story 2. Information from Google. Illinois requires drivers aged 75 and older to renew their licenses in person. Drivers 75 and older renewing in person must pass both a vision test and a road test. Drivers aged 81 through 86 must renew every 2 years, and drivers 87 and older must renew annually. When I took my 17-year-old daughter for her road test, she was waiting with an older man who was taking his first road test since he was a teen. They were both equally nervous. Story 3. My grandmother was still able to drive even though she could barely push the brake pedal all the way down. My grandfather had seizures and eventually had his driver's license taken away because he would not take his medications and had a seizure while driving more than once. My husband's grandfather drove into a ditch because he could not multitask while driving, for example when adjusting the heat and vents. Story 4. My 91-year-old grandmother has macular degeneration, cataracts, and is in the early stages of dementia. She failed her eye exam at one department of motor vehicles office but went to another and somehow passed. She should not be driving. She could hurt someone, hurt herself, or become completely lost. For clarification, she lives in a small town of 600 people. The closest city with a ride-sharing service is 45 minutes away. She is still capable of living on her own for now. I think the only reason my family has not taken action to stop her from driving is concern that she might need to drive to the hospital. I do not condone her driving and have no control over the situation. My uncle and cousin live in the same town and help her get where she needs to go. The only time she drives, to my knowledge, is to a small grocery store about a quarter of a mile down her road. Small towns could start initiatives for teens or adult volunteers to drive the elderly to appointments and to get basic household necessities. Story 5. Absolutely. I'm an auto adjuster, and I once had a couple in their 70s cause a terrible rear-end collision while merging on the freeway. The older man was driving, became confused, and collided with a car that was going at full speed. The older woman had a chihuahua on her lap and the airbag struck it. They took it to a veterinarian, but it died the next day. I had to pay for its euthanasia. The other driver had minor injuries. The man sounded so broken on the phone. They never got another car, and their little companion died. Their daughter called me to see if there was anything in the police report that explained why it happened, and of course there wasn't. My parents are the same age and drive around with little dogs. My mom says that sometimes my dad looks like he forgets he's driving, takes his hands off the wheel, and she has to yell at him to stop. I'm going to report him to the Secretary of State if she doesn't take him to get a retest soon. Story 6. My ex's great-aunt, who was 98, once told us she did not check her blind spot anymore because it made her dizzy and caused her to black out. So yes, absolutely. I also have no clue to this day how my nan ever passed her test in her 70s. She cannot drive to save her life. Had she been 18, they would have failed her 100%. Story 7. Yes. I am a young, healthy 27-year-old who uses a wheelchair and drives an adapted van. Because of this, I must be tested every few years. I have never had an accident, have 0 demerit points, and have never been pulled over. Yet older drivers who mix up the gas and brake pedals or forget to turn on their lights at night are often allowed to continue driving despite potential safety risks. Story 8. My grandfather, in his early 80s, got into a car accident a few years ago when he backed into another car. My grandmother, whose Alzheimer's has steadily worsened for several years, may not be allowed to drive now that they live in a care home. Before that, I distinctly remember her driving us to the grocery store and forgetting where we were going, missing the turn back to her house and other lapses. I believe older drivers should be required to retake the driver's test. I also agree that drivers in general should be retested every few years. Perhaps not very often, but I would not mind retaking it every 10 years or so, and more often with advancing age if it would reduce accidents. Story 9. Sadly, I'm having this issue with my father. Both my mother and I think it's safer that my 74-year-old father stop driving because of cognitive impairment, visual difficulties, and medication that at times leave him not mentally fit to drive. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions for the greater good, even if it means being seen as the bad person. At least people will be safe. Story 10. Absolutely. I would not say it should apply only to the elderly. Everybody should periodically retake the driving test about every 10 years. Story 11. You take a road test as a teenager and rarely after that. Like any license, drivers should pass a test every few years to maintain it. In reply to many commenters, I realized testing every 5 years could be prohibitively expensive. Maybe 10 years is better, than every 2 years after age 65. With current technology, we could design a simulator-based test administered by a machine to measure reaction time and compliance with traffic laws. Drivers with multiple moving violations should be retested. A regular written test on a computer could keep drivers informed of law changes. Doing nothing leads to higher insurance premiums, more vehicular deaths, and allows people who lack the cognitive ability to drive to remain on the road. I took a road test at 17, and since then the only time I had to demonstrate ability was a written test after moving to another state. Other than that, I renew my license by mail and have not visited the Department of Motor Vehicles in years. Story 12. I think it should be a requirement for everyone to pass a driving test every 5 to 10 years. Many people do not understand fundamental rules of the road because they either lucked out or simply forgot. Story 13. The written exams are ridiculously easy in many states. If anything, the standards to obtain a license should be raised for everyone, not just the elderly. I have seen numerous accidents in cities that seemed unavoidable, in part because of unsafe habits on the road. Story 14. Why limit testing to elderly people? Everyone develops bad habits. Road conditions and laws change constantly, and people forget rules. Require retesting every 5 to 10 years. This would create safer roads, increase revenue, and avoid accusations of age discrimination. Story 15. I think this is a no-brainer. You must be tested every few years for most professional licenses, so why not for a driver's license? Testing only 16 to 18-year-olds is a shoddy practice. Things change. You could avoid age discrimination by requiring that everyone be retested every couple of years, not just those over 50 or over 65. Sadly, I doubt such a system would be implemented. Regardless of efforts to avoid discrimination, there are roadblocks. Off the top of my head, American Association of Retired Persons would portray the legislation as an attack on the elderly. As the nation's largest special interest group, which caters mostly to the largest voter group, you would lose a key demographic. Other special interest groups representing drivers would oppose it as an inconvenience. Implementing it would be an infrastructural headache. The Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Public Safety, or Department of Licensing are already understaffed in many places, and people dislike visiting them. Requiring motorists to return more often would inundate those offices. Requiring frequent trips to the Department of Motor Vehicles is a hard sell, especially when applicants must pay what many view as an extortionate fee. It would help with voter registration because of the Motor Voter Act. In short, yes. Story 16. Yes, I do not even know how my grandmother is still allowed to drive. I am genuinely afraid to drive with her. She is likely to cause an accident soon. Story 17. In New Zealand, you must renew your license when you turn 75 and 80, and then every 2 years thereafter. You must also bring a medical certificate showing that a doctor considers you safe to drive. Story 18. Yes. To avoid the argument about age discrimination, I would be perfectly happy to be retested every 5 years if this meant everyone had to. Story 19. Yes. It should be something we are consistently tested on every 5 to 10 years, and more frequently as people get older. I have always felt this way, but I recently learned that someone I went to high school with died in a car accident because an 88-year-old man was driving on the wrong side of the highway in broad daylight. It was just last week. The following contains a somewhat graphic description of what happened. This 26-year-old man was driving to go home or meet some friends on a weekday morning when he met his death in a fiery car crash that left 60% of his body covered in third-degree burns. He was trapped in the car for 20 minutes before they got him out. He was on life support for 4 days before they pronounced him brain dead and removed life support. He passed away on Saturday. I barely knew this person and had not spoken to him in years, but the fact that his life was taken and that he most likely died in extreme pain and fear, in a way none of us can imagine, makes me so angry for him and his family. That man should not have been driving. He entered a major roadway on the wrong side because he was confused and ended up taking his own life and the life of someone who had only just started his journey. We need to have people tested repeatedly to ensure everyone driving is safe and capable. Story 20. Yes, so much so. It's heartbreaking when an elderly person loses their driver's license because it was taken away for being potentially dangerous to themselves or others. Many certifications and licenses must be renewed every 3 to 4 years. Why is the driver's license, where lives are at stake, valid for 80 years or more? Story 21. Almost every time I have had a near miss, such as being nearly rear-ended, cut off, or sideswiped, the other driver has not been elderly. I believe there should be periodic retesting every 5 to 7 years for all drivers because people become complacent. Story 22. If we can limit when people can start driving, why can't we limit when they should stop driving? Story 23. I am 67. I did a bit of research when I noticed my reaction time had slowed. When other drivers do the unexpected, it takes me a few more seconds to sort out what is happening. In some situations, those few seconds can make a huge difference. I am healthy and not on any medication, with no specific health issues, but I am aging. The cursory research I did was alarming. It advised that after a few accidents, it may be time to rethink driving. Therefore, I only drive during the daytime and within my neighborhood, where the residential speed limit is 25 miles per hour. Short trips, paying close attention, and I am prepared to give it up if I have a close call. I may stop driving at 68 regardless. I do not want to risk hurting anyone. I have the option of riding the bus because I live in a suburban area with a main thoroughfare a few blocks away. The reality in the United States is that many communities are built to accommodate cars rather than people. As programs to help people are cut, what do older adults do if they stop driving, have irregular or no public transportation, and need to go to doctor appointments or the grocery store? Having systems in place to support age-related limitations would help. Regular testing would also help, although it would not address entitlement or strong feelings of independence. It is a tough and complex problem. Story 24. Yes, because slowness can kill just as much as inexperience. Story 25. It should be required every year after a set age. I watched my grandparents go from being able to drive to needing care within a short time. Many older adults take multiple medications and will argue that it is fine because their doctor prescribed 14 different medications and they can still drive. I doubt that. If we were caught driving on the amount of medication some older adults take, we would be arrested. Story 26. I do not see a problem with everyone having to take annual competency tests. Story 27. The sole reason this does not get passed into law everywhere is older elected officials who drive dangerously and do not want to lose votes or their licenses. Story 28. A friend of mine was driving on the highway at night in the left-hand lane when an 80-year-old man collided with her head-on. He had been driving himself to the hospital despite his family telling him not to, and he took the wrong on-ramp. She suffered massive injuries, was told she might never walk again, and has required and will continue to require major surgeries. The man died at the scene after paramedics had to decide whom to airlift. She was almost passed over because she was so trapped. Took 45 minutes to free her. No one called her family until she was almost 2 hours later at the hospital, although they were only an hour's drive away. She was alone for 3 hours, from being trapped in her car with a crushed pelvis to being airlifted to the hospital, with only strangers to comfort her. When conscious, she begged them to call her mother and tried to hand them her phone. She was not only physically injured, but her whole life was disrupted. She missed months of school, accumulated large medical bills, had to relearn how to walk, and was accused by local news of texting while driving. They published her name without her parents' permission. She was a minor. She received hate mail and online harassment. This man took a teenager's future and turned it upside down. Her family rearranged their lives to care for her. There was no excuse for his actions, his negligence, or his family's negligence. Older adults should be tested and retested to ensure they are fit to drive, have adequate vision, and can follow the rules. Story 29. I often hear people say this is discriminatory, but I disagree. It is not discrimination to ensure someone is physically capable of using something that can kill others. I do not think it should apply only to the elderly. Licenses should be renewed with a test every 5 to 7 years. Age is not the only factor that produces dangerous drivers. Laziness and arrogance do as well. Some people think they have been driving for years, so they drive dangerously or forget basic traffic rules and cause accidents. Everyone should be retested for competence. Story 30. Yes. If a person cannot operate a vehicle due to physical problems, they should not be allowed to drive. My grandmother willingly gave up driving when her vision deteriorated. If she had not stopped, no one would have prevented her unless she became involved in a serious accident. It is similar. If I lose my glasses, I should not be allowed to drive. Story 31. Older drivers can be more dangerous than new drivers, although new drivers are also risky. Some older drivers have poor vision, sometimes cause rear-end collisions, drive very slowly, or blatantly disobey traffic laws. There should be an age at which periodic driving ability tests become mandatory. Ideally, everyone should retake a driving test at least once every decade. Story 32. I am a medic. I have met the parents of a deceased 23-year-old beside the car their child died in after it was T-boned by a man in his early to mid-80s who had dementia. He apparently forgot which pedal was which, accelerated through a red light onto the highway, and caused the 23-year-old's car to roll off an overpass. Police later said he had taken the wrong medications and was affected by his pain medications because he had misplaced his glasses and could not read the label. He lived with his wife and daughter. It was not clear where they were at the time. People can argue that elderly drivers need to maintain mobility, but this creates unacceptable risk. This family's poor old grandfather killed a young woman. I know other factors cause crashes, and I do not believe this was a purely medical or innocent event. I feel the same anger toward drunk drivers, distracted drivers, and the person who was applying makeup while driving and hit my brother while he was on his bicycle. If it were up to me, we would test drivers more often. There are many dangerous drivers traveling at more than 55 miles per hour who need to be managed. Story 33. Why limit it to elderly people? I think everybody should have to take an actual physical driving and vision test every set number of years. Doing it once a year would be excessive, but every 5 to 7 years does not seem unreasonable to me. Story 34. I think driving tests are too easy. There are too many reckless, selfish drivers. Yesterday I was out running and crossed a street and had to jump back onto the sidewalk because a driver ran a stop sign and shouted at me from the car window. It's a stop sign and I'm a pedestrian at a crosswalk. Jesus Christ. Story 35. I am a medical student, and my attending physician asked me to write a report on this topic. I am not sure how it works elsewhere, but in Pennsylvania a physician can recommend that an older adult lose their driver's license if the physician believes the patient is a threat to public safety. Driving habits are supposed to be discussed during a routine physical exam, and the doctor proceeds based on the patient's responses. This is a huge can of worms because it is another debate over where we draw the line between safety and liberty. Story 36. When we were both 13, my best friend and his friend were hit by a car while skateboarding in a residential area. My best friend died shortly after the accident, and his friend was pronounced dead a few days later when doctors determined he would not come out of the coma caused by the crash. The driver was 84 years old and, according to the investigation, was not speeding and did not appear to be doing anything that would compromise his ability to drive safely. Why, then, did he accidentally strike and kill two 13-year-old boys while driving 30 miles per hour? Perhaps age-related decline compromised his ability to drive. If so, and if he had received screening to determine whether he was safe behind the wheel, maybe one of the people closest to me would still be alive 10 years later. Story 37. I have been saying this for years. Once you reach 65, you should have to retake the road test every 2 years. My grandmother has been almost blind since 1999 and is still driving. I am shaking my head. Story 38. Yes, of course. Why is this a debate? I see so many older adults who are unable to drive a car safely. Story 39. Yes, but shouldn't everybody need one every so often? I know many people whose driving skills have declined with age, and they refuse to acknowledge it. The best example I have seen recently involved an elderly gentleman who was driving down the wrong side of a divided highway and hit another motorist head-on. My parents tried to stop him but were unsuccessful because they did not want to drive the wrong way and create even more risk. I was not there but spoke with them immediately afterward. They stopped at the scene and were told by the police that both parties were unlikely to survive and that they should not look at the wreckage because it was so gruesome. I felt bad for the man even though I did not really know him because he did not know he was doing anything wrong. However, I feel worse for the person whose car he collided with because they were not doing anything wrong and probably died. I did not follow up to find out, but it did not look good. To summarize, an elderly family friend was driving down the wrong side of the road and unknowingly caused a deadly collision. Story 40. How about everyone taking a road test every 5 years? Why single out the elderly? People age at different rates. Some people lose their sight or do not have their glasses checked. This happened to me. I failed an eye test and was told I would not be issued a license unless I returned with better glasses. Story 41. Everyone should be required to undergo this at regular intervals. An eye test alone is not sufficient. The main issue for older people is not vision but their ability to react quickly and apply the brakes. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.